above all else, in my opinion, The Exorcist is the GOAT. It's the greatest horror movie of all time, in my opinion. After 50 years, I can confidently say that. It's not my favorite, but I feel like
Mhm.
it's the GOAT.
Yeah, and it's always interesting when people ask those type of questions too, because you can easily acknowledge as a film as being the greatest and still say, well, it's not my favorite. I have other personal favorites, but I consider that to be the GOAT of the genre.
Hello, friends. I'm Anderson Marchak,
And I'm Ricardo Segura.
and we are the Panel Bros. Welcome to the panel.
Welcome to the panel.
Well, here we are.
Here we are.
It's, as of this recording, it is early October of 2023. So, as they say online, spooky season has begun. And we are going to be doing a breakdown today of a very well-known movie that's been out for decades now. And it's a breakdown that, it's going to correlate with a new release that we will talk about later on that's coming out. So let's just get to it here. This was directed by William Friedkin. It was released on December the 26th of 1973. We're coming up on 50 years now. Today, the Panel Bros are going to do their official breakdown for The Exorcist.
Bro, let me honesty here. Honesty here.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't notice about myself. You knew this about me. This watch for this episode was my very first watch of this classic, The Exorcist. I was, and we had talked about this for years. You've known about this for years. I was petrified of watching this movie because as a kid, I seen glimpses, I seen trailers, I heard music, whatever was attached to this movie, and it horrified me as a kid. And for years, I was like, you know what, man? I think that's just one of those movies that's just a little too scary for me. I don't think I can do it. And you were like, one day, man, one day we're gonna get you to watch. And I was like, I don't know. I said, I'm kind of a baby. I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it. And I'm delighted to say that I am ecstatic that we decided to do it, and then I was brave enough to dive in because as soon as I finished, I was so excited to talk about this movie and how it absolutely lives up to all the hype in the horror community and horror world. So as we go through this, you'll see me gush a little bit. So I'm going from a guy who was so terrified of watching this movie to be like, oh my God, I cannot wait to talk about this movie.
Right. So, and let's get a little clarification here. I think you said you'd seen pieces while it was on
Yes.
in the living room over the
Yes.
years. Like you've seen
Over
it,
the years, like being a
maybe
kid, Halloween time, it would be on some random television channel, and I would watch for a second, see something like, nope, can't do it, and I would hightail
or even
it.
as an adult, it would come on,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
you'd be like, and then change the
Nope.
channel, whatever.
I could have. I remember times being like in college in a dorm room and just flickering through, and all of a sudden it'd be like, what is this movie? What is this? Nope, can't do it. I tried, can't do it. So like I don't think I was ready.
Yeah.
But now I was ready to dive in. So I apologize to all the horror community for taking so long to see it, but now that I have, I'm absolutely excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and as we, do this breakdown today, I will gush about The Exorcist because it's something that I always come back to when people talk to me about horror movies, and it might have been my first. I don't want to. Well, no, I'd seen a few horror movies as a kid, but the first time I saw one, and I just, wow, this was something really special. Even as a young person, like I don't want to say a kid, but maybe as a teenager, like I knew I was seeing something special before I even became a certified film buff. So. All right, well, let's get this show on the road here and
Let's get it.
Start on off. All righty, so we are in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. We have actress Chris McNeil, played by Ellen Bernstein, and she's starring in a film. Chris, along with her 12-year-old daughter, Reagan, played by Linda Blair, rents a house with servants. We have Father Damien Karras, a psychiatrist who counsels Georgetown University priests and visits his ailing mother in New York. Now, this was not the opening scene. We had an opening scene with another character who we will get to
Mhm.
meet later on, who was doing some type of archaeology overseas, and there was a lot of disturbing imagery. He found this like demon statue, and
Mhm.
um, there was like just this eerie atmosphere of people walking around. You saw these nuns, but they made it spooky for some reason. There were
Yeah, yeah.
dogs fighting, and
The framing of this whole opening
yeah,
is specifically done to give a feeling of tension and eeriness. Like you said, you see two nuns walking by, but the way that it's framed, it gives it almost like a horror aesthetic, and then the dogs fighting, and it's almost like this is a very scary vibe. And again, it's at an archaeology dig, and I like I told you, I was like, where are like did I
right,
put the right movie on? Like I wasn't sure that I put the right movie on. And I was like, oh wait, we're building something here. And then when we
right.
saw the statue, I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna mean something.
Right,
Okay.
and that's Father. We'll get to know him as Father Merrin later on, but we have no idea who this man is.
Nope.
And then we finally shift to our leads. We have Chris and Reagan, and we get to see this situation here. The first time we see something that kind of makes your raise eyebrows with Chris and Reagan is that Reagan pulls out the Ouija board,
Yes.
and that was the first time it was like, uh-oh, and we find out that something or someone is playing the game back with her,
Hmm.
and she calls this person Captain Howdy. And like I said, we'd already seen a few things until now. We saw Merrin dig up the artifacts and such, and it was that eerie opening. But now we see our leads here, where it's like, and then she says, oh yeah, I play with Captain Howdy, and we're just like, oh,
Yeah.
that ain't right.
Just very nonchalant. Again, I had no idea a Ouija board was in this movie. So when
Right,
she pulled it out, I was like, wait a minute. So like I was like, wait, is this the reason? Like again, as a first-time viewer, I was like, oh, did she invite something in? Like,
right.
okay, so I'm learning all this right away. And she mentions the Captain Howdy, and I was like, oh, wait, is she already communicating with something? And I was like, is she joking with her mom? Is it authentic? And then she starts to tease her a little bit. And I was like, oh, girl, get that thing out your house.
Right. So Karras confides to a colleague that he feels unfit in his role, and he citing a crisis of faith as a priest.
Hmm.
Um, we find out that Reagan can't sleep, and we keep hearing noises in the room and in the attic, and we can't see where the noises are coming from. We shift to another scene, and we see that a statue at the church has been desecrated. Um, we never find out who did it, though, but it is theorized that maybe Reagan did it, maybe not. We don't know,
Yeah.
and I mean, that's not really a spoiler here. We know what things are going with Reagan,
Oh, we
so
know.
yeah,
We know.
everybody knows where things are going with Reagan. So there's a theory that maybe she had done it, maybe not. We don't know. Um, so Karras visits his mother in a mental health facility, and he feels bad about it because,
Mhm.
um, you know, she says, "Oh, you abandoned me, leave me alone," et cetera, et cetera. So we get a little bit
Yeah,
more of building some exposition with Karras here.
it's a very sad situation, and I already, as a character decision, I really liked for the story the idea of a person of faith losing their faith
Yeah.
in a movie about what we knew was going to be a battle of good and evil. And I was like, "Ooh, this is a very interesting character decision to have in the story." And I said, I appreciated that. And it was also really sad to have him deal with his mom, knowing that he didn't want her alone, so he took her someplace he thought would be better for her, and she felt he abandoned her. And that broke my heart a little bit. And I was like, man, he's dealing with all this internally, his faith, and now he's got to deal with this extra weight of a quote unquote abandoning his mother, and that's just wearing more on this character. And I just as a film lover, I'm enjoying where we're going with him.
So Chris hosts a party with Karras's friend, Father Dyer, who explains Karras's role as counselor, mentioning that his mother died recently, so she didn't
Mhm.
make it after getting to the mental health facility. Reagan, seemingly unwell, appears and says, "You're going to die up there." And then she urinates before Chris can comfort her. Now we're getting into it. This is where
Mhm.
now something disturbing actually happens with Reagan. She says something disturbing, and then unfortunately, she urinates on herself. Um, After she puts Reagan to bed, it starts shaking violently.
Yeah.
And she keeps screaming, "Mother," cries for help. Now things are starting to pick up,
Yep.
and it was done practically. So I mean, we're looking at 50 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
not like we didn't use CGI or anything like that. We just see a bed shaking.
It was great.
And
It was great.
yeah. And Chris is wondering what the heck is going on here, but we don't know anything yet. So Dyer consoles Karis, who is expressing guilt at not having been with his mother when she died.
Mhm.
Karis ends up having a nightmare about his mother, and in the nightmare, we see a brief flash of an ugly face that we will
Yeah.
see again several times throughout the movie. Things start picking up even more now, where Reagan's personality starts becoming violent. She is subjected to medical tests, which find no physical cause. During this first test here, she screams, she spits on the doctor, and she starts cursing. The doctor is trying to convince Chris this is a neurological problem for the personality change. The doctor convinces Chris that the bed wasn't shaking. It was Reagan having muscle convulsions. And we see Reagan get an invasive procedure where they stick her neck to have an arteriogram. That's what that's
Yeah.
called.
This was
And
rough.
and you see the blood squirting out of the little tube
Mhm.
here, and it's a procedure in which it involves dyes to see what's going on inside of the body throughout the major organs there. So you feel really bad for Reagan as she's going through this here.
Yeah, this was uncomfortable to watch in that type of a way where you're seeing a little girl go through this, and we know as an audience it's a little bit deeper than what these um, medical professionals think it is. There was a moment where you mentioned where she gets a shot from the doctor and she curses at him. What I loved about the way they executed that scene was throughout this, as we meet Reagan, she is like such a sweet girl.
Right.
She's so sweet.
In the
So
beginning.
when
Right.
yeah, so when that scene happens, it's the first like profanity in the film, and it's a hard F bomb. And she calls the doctor a horrible name, and she drops this F bomb, and it's kind of like the first time we're seeing this side of her, and it's such a complete polar opposite of the character we've seen up to that point. So even something as simple as vulgar language was done so well in order to get the point across that this person was changing drastically. And then as you see her going through all that trauma where they're doing the medical procedures, it's just really hard to watch, especially as a parent just watching their child go through something like that. I was like, I like the progression, but it was hard to watch.
Yeah. So now we're back at the house, and some more things are happening to Reagan. We see her rocking and flopping back and forth on the bed. It's like
Mhm.
this, just back and forth on the bed, up and down. And once again, this is a thing she always says. She cries for her mother.
Mhm.
Mother, make it stop. It's burning. He's trying to kill me. We see the whites of her eyes, and we hear a scary voice come out of her for the first time. Then we start hearing even more vulgar things come out of her. Um, this would not be the last time. F bomb. She's saying F
Yeah.
me to the priests that are in the room. This is a house call here. Well, to the doctors, excuse me, not the priests.
Yeah.
We haven't, no priests yet. And during that house call, Reagan exhibits abnormal strength. This is an awful scene. They're
Mhm.
trying to sedate Reagan, and Chris is hysterical, crying her eyes out in the corner. Bursting and Blair, I put down here, really start turning up the intensity,
Yeah.
especially Linda Blair,
Yeah.
for this one scene.
The scene, she goes so hard, man, and she kills it. And her mother is watching and like just mortified and crying. Like everything about the way they execute a lot of these sequences is so well done, and you just can't help but feel the horror that's happening at that very moment at that time.
So one night, Chris finds the house empty except for a sleeping Reagan. And the room is super cold. It's so cold you can see the breath coming from Chris's mouth as she walks in.
Mhm.
We later find out that a man is found dead beneath Reagan's window outside. Fast forward to a scene where we see Reagan getting hypnotized, and the hypnotist is trying to speak with the person inside of Reagan. Once again, we hear the scary voice coming out of her. It's not her, it's a different voice,
Mhm.
and she attacks the men there. A detective questions Karras, the priest, confiding that the victim's head was turned backwards. The
Yeah.
person that, fell out the window there. Um, he was the friend of Chris, actually, that was really drunk at the party.
Mhm.
That's who that person was. We see Chris with a room full of doctors now. Chris is a famous actress. She can afford this.
Yes.
So that's why this is happening, where she can afford this type of treatment. She's a very famous actress. It's very meta here. And she's arguing with them about finding a solution to Reagan's problem. One doctor suggests an exorcism.
Yeah.
The doctor says perhaps it isn't real, but at least the victim will be cured with the power of suggestion. Chris gets upset and says, "You want me to take my daughter to see a witch doctor?"
Witch
So,
doctor.
so we learned that Chris isn't really a person of faith, and neither is
No.
Reagan at this
No.
point. So to say, well, maybe we can basically pray it out of her, she just looks at him like he doesn't know what he's talking about,
And it's interesting because it's coming from a medical professional, which
Right.
more times, more often than not, it's all about the medical science. Is what they can see before them, what they can do. So I thought that was very interesting for the doctor to say, "Hey, have you heard of an exorcism?" And her reaction is like, "You want what?" And then he brings up a very good point, and I was like, "Oh, I never thought about that from a medical
Right.
standpoint." Where he's like, "Well, if it's in her head, it's suggestive." And if we can somehow convince her that the exorcism will exercise what is
Right.
inside
I
of her,
mean,
then
right,
I'm
and
like,
and
"Oh,
let's not go
okay.
too far because they were churchgoers. They did attend church,
Yeah,
like she's friends with these priests, so it's not like she didn't attend church,
yeah.
but she didn't think like it was like a full-blown exorcism type
Yeah," you know
situation,
what I mean? Yeah, yeah,
So Reagan's condition worsens as her body becomes covered with sores. The detective visits, telling Chris that the only plausible explanation for the man's death is that he was pushed from Reagan's window.
mhm.
As the detective leaves, Reagan has another violent fit, and we see things start flying around. Um, Chris goes into the room. She sees like all these things just start flying, and it's almost like a poltergeist situation because
Yeah,
obviously Reagan's not the one throwing them. Um, oh man, how do I say this? Okay,
yeah,
she begins stabbing her private area
yep.
with a crucifix, and her head turns backwards. A
Thi
180 it does.
thi
Yes.
this is probably excuse me, when people talk about, like, iconic scenes or memorable scenes or scenes that, like, shook people to their core,
Yeah.
this is one of those scenes, and it's graphic enough that it almost, like, repulses you to the like, "Oh my god, what am I watching?" Like, she's stabbing herself with a crucifix, and she's yelling heinous things.
Yeah.
And then you get that moment that everyone remembers for The Exorcist is where a head turns completely around and you're just like, "Oh my god." And one thing, and we've spoken about this. One thing I love about this scene in particular, and many other scenes, but this scene in particular, is that the movie doesn't allow it to linger too long. It's that you
Right.
see these really horrific moments, and then in a flash, it's over. So it doesn't let you catch your breath. It's like boom, hits you, and it's over. And that was a really, really, really hard scene to watch. Just everything that was happening with Regan and her mom, and then the head turn, which is again very synonymous with this movie and well known, and just executed so good.
Right. Um, I'm going to make some brief notes here because I want to give a little bit of details here to to the folks that are listening and watching here. We were already in it at this point. Obviously, a lot
Mhm.
of things had happened, and it's been a gradual build, which is something this movie
Yes.
does a great job of doing. And this is where it just starts going overboard. In
Mhm.
one split second, you hear the voice say, "Let Jesus f you." You
Yeah.
know, um, she says and does vulgar things with her mother in the scene.
Yeah.
The door slams, a chair moves to barricade it, the chest of drawers moves by itself, and the money shot is Reagan's head turns completely around, a 180.
Yeah.
So it's her back is facing, but the head turns around, and while the entity continues to say vulgar things,
Yeah.
um, it is intense, it is awful,
Yeah.
and one thing I need to remind people of is whenever you watch this movie, the nasty things that the entity is saying, imagine hearing these nasty things being said in 1973.
Yeah, dude. Like,
It's like it's rivaling some of the stuff I've heard in Tarantino movies or
yeah,
Martin Scorsese movies, that are
yeah,
notorious for their cursing, you
yeah.
know?
We're getting vulgar language, and it's what she's saying, and
Right.
the context of the scene in itself. Again, things we can't ever repeat here, and it's just to go that far in the 70s with a child actor.
Right.
It was unbelievable, and it's very visual. Even the moment between the mother and the daughter,
Right.
and what she says to her own mom and what she makes her mom
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
It
I'm not even
was,
going to say that. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
I was blown away.
Yeah.
Like, this is my first time watching it, and I'm like, and I didn't think about that. It's a good point. I can't imagine what that would have been like watching that in the 70s in the
Right.
theater
Like, oh
for
my
the first time.
gosh, I can't believe they're doing
Like,
this.
like that must have been, and I don't know if it's the right word, but that might have been groundbreaking at the time to
Right.
see something like that. And the fact that they had the gall to do that, like, man, that's a bold move in the 70s. You know what I mean? But they went for it. They went
Yeah.
for it.
So Chris seeks out Karis, who visits Reagan. And Reagan is now strapped to a bed that is padded. And the possessed Reagan claims to be the devil himself, and projectile vomits the infamous pea soup
Yep.
into Karis's face while speaking in tongues. The demon says it will remain in Reagan until she is dead, specifically until she rots and lies stinking in the earth.
Mm-hmm.
He throws holy water on her, and Reagan screams it burns. Karis reveals to Chris that it wasn't holy water, it was just tap water.
This was interesting.
So now is this a true possession? Is it not?
Yeah.
What's going on here? Right.
This part got me because, again,
Yeah.
this is my first time watching. So when he goes, it's just tap water, I went, what? And I was like, what do you mean it was just tap water? So,
Right.
like, this took me back a second. I was like, it put a little bit of doubt, even though everything I've seen up to this point would make me believe, no, it's authentic. When he said that, I said, well, then why did it react that way? So it was interesting.
We get another reveal here. Chris says to Reagan that Chris says to Karis that Reagan, she believes, pushed Burke Dennings out the window, the man that hurt himself. That was the drunk friend.
Yeah.
So at night, Chris's assistant calls Karis to the house. Still ambivalent, Karis concludes that an exorcism is warranted. His superior grants permission on the condition that an experienced priest lead the ritual. This is where Merrin comes into place here.
Yep.
Comes into play. Merrin, having performed an exorcism before, is summoned. Merrin arrives at the house. As the priests read from the Roman ritual, the demon curses at them. So now we go even further with the demon showing itself. It's very vulgar. It's where the movie earns the hard R cursing.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, I'm surprised this movie didn't get an NC-17. Well, NC-17 it didn't exist at the time.
Not yet, but I could see this movie being what pushes it, because there was stuff I was like, man, this movie's going. Again, we have to keep in mind the time period and how different films were with wide release and whatnot. And it was like, oh, like, yeah, I could see them possibly thinking about, like, do we need to go harder on a rating for this thing?
Right. I think it would have been probably 1X. That's what it would have been. That 1X is the equivalent of NC-17 to my understanding. So, the entity is only showing weakness and pain to the holy water. It spits in Merrin's face, and he just keeps on reading. Gets the napkin, wipes it off. Reagan is making faces, noises, inappropriate tongue movements, and just going for it. The bed starts floating off the floor.
Yeah, dude.
Karis is now shook because obviously no one has ever seen anything like this in their entire lives, let alone, even the priest or not. So he doesn't know what to do. And then the pea soup vomit starts oozing out of Reagan's mouth.
Yeah.
And Merrin just continues on. Instead of getting a bucket, the best he can do is take his stole off, and catch it, and then says, all right, go wash it and bring it back to me. At this point, Reagan's head does a complete 360 all the
Yup.
way around. So before it was just the 180 where she turned and she looked behind her, but now it's all
Yep.
the way around. And I believe this was symbolism to mimic or mock what happened to Burke as his head was turned around.
Yeah, because that was
When
a
he fell.
big thing they said is like, hey, when they found his body, like his head was completely turned around, and I was like,
Right.
okay,
Um, and when the head turns all the way around, you see a flash of the demon's face on her face again. Reagan's straps tear, and then she starts floating above the bed and room. Now Reagan herself is floating.
yeah,
They're continuing to to pray and read from the book. The holy water is now creating cuts on Reagan with every splash. It's a nice
yep,
little detail if you can catch it. And we have an infamous line here that the priests start yelling, "The power of Christ compels you,"
oh yeah,
over and over again. They both get thrown down. Reagan does a pose on the bed, and then we see the shadow of the statue
dude,
right
that
next to her. Please, you told me about this off the air.
that reveal, the way that it's executed is so well done, and it kind of for the first time, as someone who's watched it for the first time, it brings the beginning of the movie up to speed, because at the beginning we see him with the statue, we
Right.
see this figure, and again at that point I was like, oh, I had no idea this is how the movie started, and I was like, I wonder what this will be moving forward. And you have that moment where you see that statuesque figure in the room with them, and you see her with the pose, and it's this like realization, you're like, oh, wait, is this the same entity, is this the same dark spirit? And you're like, is this what this priest battled before? You know what I mean? Like everything starts
Right.
rushing, but like just like that scene in particular, the way that it's shot and executed, it's just so well done. I would say, in my opinion, like throughout the movie, there's a couple iconic scenes and frames. That to me is one of my favorites. Like I was like, that it's just so well done.
The priest rest, and Merrin, shaking, takes nitroglycerin. This is for his coronary artery disease.
Mm-hmm.
Karras enters the bedroom where the demon appears as his mother
Yeah.
that had passed away. Showing weakness, Karras exclaims that the demon is not his mother. Merrin excuses Karras and continues the exorcism by himself because now Karras is too shaken to continue.
Yep.
Karras, outside the bedroom, assures Chris that Reagan will not die and re-enters the room to find Merrin dead on the
Yeah.
bed, slumped over. We don't see how it happens.
Nope. He's just dead. And I was
Yeah.
like, what?
So the explanation given is that he probably had a heart attack,
Mhm.
and Karras, in an act of desperation, throws him on the ground and starts, he does a double axe handle
Yep.
to the chest to try to maybe have a miracle and bring him back, but obviously nothing happens. Couldn't resuscitate him. Enraged, Karras beats the possessed Reagan, straight up throwing fists.
Yeah, dude.
at
Punching her
right,
square in the face.
back and forth. You can hear it, and demands that the demon take him instead, rather. The demon rips the medallion of Saint Joseph from Karras's neck and then possesses him. And then immediately you see the white of the eyes,
Yep.
and it frees Reagan immediately. Karras gets a hold of himself long enough, because then the demon tries going for Reagan, who's no longer possessed,
Mhm.
while in Karras's body. And he says no. Karras hurls himself out of the window, tumbling down the stairs outside. This is an insane climax to a movie that we've
Yeah.
seen so far, because it's just been such a gradual progression. We're getting
Yes.
hints of the demon here and there, disturbing scenes here and there, but the final half hour, you're just getting beat over the head with moment after moment after moment. And it culminates in the priest saying, "Come into me," and jumping out the window to save this
It
little
is
girl.
the final act is truly a battle. That's the best way to describe it. It's a battle of good and evil, and you're seeing these the priests battling with this evil entity, and they're just going back and forth. And there's weakness, there's vulnerability, there's death, and then in that one moment where he takes over and he jumps out the window to save Regan, it's just like it's a culmination of, like you said, like this movie does a really good job of progression. Everything gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we get that final climax, which is just an all-out war. And for the priest, for Karras to say, "Take me," again, as a first-time viewer, I'm like, "Oh, what happens at that point?" And then they show the window,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh, he's gonna leap, he's gonna jump. That's what's gonna happen." And that's what he did. And I love the way that he took a hold of it. Like, you actually see his fists. He brings his fist up and he goes, "No," and he squeezes his fist
Mhm.
as if to, like, metaphorically, like, take hold. And he goes, "No," and he leaps out the window, and you just get these brutal shots of this dude just hitting the stairs and just falling harder and harder, rolling down until he's just completely out. And then you see the blood on the ground, and you're like, "Oh, that's how he beats it."
Right.
And it's insane.
Chris and Kinderman enter the room, and Chris embraces the healed Reagan, who is crying and weeping, once again, asking for her mother.
Yep.
And Kinderman surveys the scene. Outside, Dyer administers the dying Karras' last rites, and we can see his hand squeezing because he can't
Yeah.
talk at that point. The McNeils prepare to leave, and Father Dyer says goodbye. Despite having no memory of despite having no memory of her ordeal, Reagan, moved by the sight of Dyer's clerical collar, kisses him on the cheek. As the McNeils leave, Chris gives Dyer the medallion found in Reagan's room. Before we close out here, I wanted to touch on the director's cut a little
Mhm.
bit. The other ending suggests that Dyer gives Karras' medallion back to Chris. After she and Reagan drive away, Dyer pauses at the top of the stone steps before walking away and coming across Kinderman, who narrowly missed Chris and Reagan's departure. And then Kinderman and Dyer begin to develop a friendship. So that's the other ending.
Mhm.
As far as the director's cut goes, the most infamous scene from the director's cut would be the spider walk down the steps where Reagan spits blood into the camera.
Yep.
Shout out to Bray Wyatt, rest in peace, where he possibly got his spider walk from there. So
Yeah.
that is our movie. And I will say this, my initial thoughts when I see this, it reminds me of how special the movie is with every rewatch.
Yeah.
And this was no different to that. And knowing that this was your first time watching the movie all the way through, I
Yeah.
couldn't wait to talk to you about it because
I was hyped. I was hyped.
it's such a great film. It supersedes the horror genre by miles. It goes
Mhm.
above and beyond. It's not just a good horror movie, it's a good movie. It is a good
Yeah.
film. And those are, my thoughts as far as this last rewatch.
Yeah, I think that was my biggest takeaway, and I was I was very proud of myself because, again, I was so worried about what my reaction was going to be because I was so terrified of watching this movie through years of little samples here and there and being scared as a child growing up, and I never just really got over it and was like, oh, that's one movie that's always going to escape me. I'm never going to be able to get a hold of that. So for me to be able to watch it today and still have fearful moments, but be able to sit back and just look at how well made of a film it really is. And like you said, it kind of surpasses the genre where I feel like you don't necessarily have to be someone who's a horror buff or a horror enthusiast or someone who just prefers horror movies. I feel like this is a movie that anyone could enjoy because the acting is fantastic, the practical effects are fantastic, you got a tight script. I absolutely adore the progression of the story. And as a first time watch, it's just an incredible feat that this movie came out in 1973,
Yes.
and I can watch this movie for the first time in 2023 and walk away thinking, what a magnificent film. Not many films can do that. Sometimes you can watch an older film that you've seen before and maybe it doesn't hold up. Sometimes you can see a film that has been built up so much, like The Exorcist has, and walk away going, oh, well, I've actually seen it for the first time now. And, it didn't really live up to all the hype. That could have been a reaction. but that's not what happened here. And I was blown away by how much I actually ended up enjoying the movie overall. So I went from being so absolutely terrified of giving this movie an opportunity, just like, nope, it's going to escape me. I'm just never going to be able to do it. To actually sitting down and appreciating it as a movie, not just for the story, not for what it was doing, but just as a movie. And I understood why the movie gets such praise, why it's spoken about in circles the way it is, why you've talking so highly of this movie. You've told me numerous times, like, hey man, like as a movie,
Right.
and you told me, you like, as someone who appreciates the art of film now as an adult, this is you got to watch it. And I was nervous, man. I'm not gonna front. I was very
Yeah, it's all right.
nervous. I was like, oh, this is gonna happen. This is gonna, all right, let's do it. And as I'm watching it, I went from, let's just say I did that moment where you're sitting back in a chair and then you lean forward because you're
Yep.
interested. I did that. I was sitting as far back from my screen as possible because I was so worried. And then I went to just sitting forward and just taken away by so many different aspects. And we'll touch on each aspect as we continue on. But for a first time watch, I was absolutely blown away at just how great the movie is in itself. So I was very happy to finally get it done.
Um, we talked about it already, but the theme song still hits.
Yeah.
Just the theme
Yeah.
song in the beginning, and you hear it again at the ending. Um, there's a bit of a theory here where people still ask, why did this happen to Reagan?
Mhm.
And was it Reagan with the Ouija board?
Yeah.
Was it Merrin digging around and finding the statue?
Mhm.
But because Merrin did die, uh, a lot of people say that Merrin was always the original target, and Reagan
Okay.
was only the tool.
Yeah. To get
Unfortunately,
Merrin up. Yeah.
yeah, to
Yeah.
get Merrin, because
And
you hear the demon scream Merrin
yeah.
before he even walks in the house.
Yeah. It's
So
like, and I was like, and again, it's another great shot. You have the iconic poster where you see the car pull up, you see the light coming through the
right,
window with the fog and smoke, and he's standing there, and then you just have Reagan's eyes. You just have this, and it's almost like the presence can be felt of Merrin, and it's just like Merrin, and it's just
yeah,
like, it's so good. And again, it was another thing that I appreciated about the film is, like you said, I was like, well, why did Reagan get chosen? Was it the Ouija board? Was it this? Because again, I didn't know a Ouija board was in the movie.
right.
So again, I was like, oh, did she invite this? Was it her? Was it that they found the statue? And I liked having that little
Yeah,
uncertainty, and
right.
I liked the
We don't
idea
know.
that
Right.
we don't know. I like that can be a conversation. I'm like, well, she was just a conduit. They just wanted to get to Marion. Oh, maybe she was messing with the Ouija board when she shouldn't have. Maybe it was the statue. Who knows? But I like that. Again, that's another great thing about this film and many films is that when you guys can just have that conversation.
Yeah. We'll talk about Linda Blair later on, but
Mhm.
we need to put it out there. She was 14 when the movie was released,
Good
and
God.
so she was possibly as young as 13 when the movie was being filmed. The
Mhm.
character is 12 in
Yeah.
the film. We've heard there's many stories over the years. I took a little snippet here. Apparently, in 1973, people were fainting, having
Mhm.
panic attacks, shaking. They were nauseous and even vomiting themselves.
Yeah.
Um, due to the things that they were seeing on screen. Um, but it did not stop people from going to see this. Let's take a look at the budget in the box office. The budget was for just $12 million, and the initial worldwide box office run was 112.3 million. So it made
Wow.
100 million. A horror movie in
In
1973
1973,
made
dude. Like,
100 million off a $12 million budget. After many releases and home video sales, director's cuts, re-releases in the theaters, The Exorcist now stands at a final box office total of 428.2 million. That is not adjusted for
that's
inflation from a
that's so
movie made for
crazy.
$12 million. So the re-releases and the home videos is what
Mhm.
really drove sales through the roof. So it made 4 times what it excuse me, it 4 times of the box office run, but, you know, for 12 million to 428 over the years, just such a testament to how
I re
groundbreaking.
I'm glad you brought up the re-release because I had this conversation with you that when they came up with a re-release many years ago, that was an opportunity where I kind of like saw a little bit more and still couldn't make it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like I remember I saw another movie, and it was crazy because even at the time of this re-release, this was many years ago. I was a kid. Like I didn't even have a license yet. Um, and I remember that even then there was still people buzzing at the movie theater. Are you good? Like, are you watching The Exorcist? You watching the re-release Exorcist? And it was one of those few times where I saw people that were not in my generation, that were older, that were rewatching a movie that scared them as a child, and then also seeing younger audiences go to this re-release to go see what the hype was about. And I remember opening the door and just peeking in and seeing a packed house, just like packed. And I was watching the screen and I saw some stuff and I was like, I got to get out of here. But I'm so glad that it did well in a re-release, and to make that much money on $12 million is nothing short of amazing. And again, for a movie that make that type of money in 1973 and be horror, that's just a win no matter how you look at it.
112 million in
Like
1973. Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah. So the Oscars came calling when The Exorcist was released the following year. It only won 2 of it was nominated for 10, and it only won 2. Yeah, nominated for 10 Oscars. So it won Best Adapted Screenplay because it was based on a book.
Nice.
And it won Best Sound Mixing. The 8 nominations that did not win are as follows. Best Actress, Ellen Bernstein. Best Adapted Screenplay. Best Art Direction. Best Cinematography. Best Director, William Friedkin. Best Film Editing. Best Picture. Best Overall Picture. Yes. Best Sound Mixing. Best Supporting Actor, Jason Miller. That's Karis. And Best Supporting Actress, the one and only Linda Blair. I can call her a young lady because she was a young lady at the time. What a special performance. This movie does not work without Linda Blair in the lead.
No.
Everybody else do an amazing job, and we are not trying to down any of their performances. You know, Karis was wonderful. Karis was great. Ellen Bernstein, she's a legend now, you know? But for we'll say a 13, 14-year-old girl to give such an amazing performance, wow.
Yeah. Because again, acting is reacting, and we talk about this, and like you said, a lot is riding on Linda Blair's performance, because to a lot of people that was the selling point of the movie, was seeing this child go through what they were going through, and that experience. And if she can't get to where she needs to go, you know, it can pull you out. And we want the other actors to have something great to work with, and Linda crushes it, man. Again, we are no stranger to seeing child actors, especially in horror movies. And some are great, and some are, you know, just sometimes it just doesn't work, you know, for whatever reason, whether it's direction or inexperience, it happens. You know what I mean? I try not to be harsh at all against child actors. Acting is a difficult thing. And for children, sometimes it's not the easiest. But when I was watching Linda Blair in this movie, again, for the first time, I'm blown away that she is potentially just a 13-year-old kid performing as hard as she is. The physicality of the role, she's nailing it. The mannerisms, the facials, everything about it, she's in it. And yes, we all know that there is another voice dubbed over her own, but as a performer, she's performing. Like, she's doing the dialogue, she's reading, she's doing it, like she is doing it. And then they're playing with sound mixing and sound design over her dialogue that's being read. So she's also having to give a performance for this ADR to follow with that. They're like, okay, we're gonna put you over Linda Blair's commentary and her voice, and we're gonna make this work and do something special. But nothing short of a magnificent. I'm so happy she was nominated for an Oscar. Absolutely. Just again, this is new information to me because I didn't follow this movie as well. So to know that pleases me. And I'm glad that this movie got 10 Oscar noms. Like, I'm very happy about that. A horror movie in 1973, 10 Oscar noms is no small feat. When you said cinematography, I was like, oh, I love the cinematography. I could talk about some of these shots all day. But Linda Blair, man, just again, like you mentioned, everyone kills it in this movie. Like everyone gives a strong performance, and that's another thing that helps this movie succeed as much as it does. Because we've even said this in other films. Sometimes we walk away from a film and go, well, the film, it was fine, but the performances, and sometimes a performance can change your experience in the movie. Luckily for us, The Exorcism has a great script. You said it won for Best Adapted Screenplay, well deserved. And then you have great acting in the middle of that. But again, you have these experienced actors, and then you have this 13-year-old child, Linda Blair, and she absolutely nailed it. And I'm surprised that her career didn't explode after this, because man, she absolutely crushed this role.
Yeah, let's continue talking about the cast here. Let's give some love to the rest of them, and we'll just do it in order here. We already have Ellen Bernstein as Chris McNeil. We have Max von Sydow as Father Merrin. We have Lee J. Cobb as Lieutenant Kinderman. We have Kitty Wynn as Sharon Spencer. That's her assistant. We have Jack McGowan as Burke Dennings. That's the man that went out the window. We have Jason Miller as Father / Dr. Damien Karras. Of course, Linda Blair as Reagan McNeil. We have Father William O'Malley as Father Joseph Dyer. So we actually got a priest to play a priest, which was really cool.
Yeah, it is.
Ron Faber as Chuck, but is also the voice of Pazuzu, the entity.
Yeah.
So shout out to that person. And then, of course, Eileen Dietz is the face of Pazuzu. Those of you that go to the horror cons will see her there, still signing autographs and such. And every now and then you'll see Linda Blair there too. So
that's cool.
Shout out to this amazing cast here. We're going to start winding things down here. And before we give our true closing thoughts, I did want to put it out there that The Exorcist obviously had more movies that followed it, had a few sequels, prequels, and even a TV show. We're looking at The Exorcist 2, The Heretic in 1977, Exorcist 3 in 1990, Exorcist The Beginning in 2004, and Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, in 2005. We also, this upcoming weekend, as of this recording, there is a new movie called Exorcist Believer that is coming out, directed by David Gordon Green, who did the new Halloween trilogy.
Yeah.
So it's I guess a requel, because it's a reboot and a sequel mixed together.
Yeah, I think that's the terminology. I think, yeah.
Yeah, because you're ignoring all the other sequels. This is now the direct sequel, and they get Ellen Bernstein to come back, which is really cool. Dude. So in addition to, spawning sequels of its own, reboot eventually, and countless other Exorcist movies.
Yep.
This is it's the Godfather. It's the one that kicked everything off. It's the start of everything. And let's just cut to the chase here. To me, The Exorcist is not only one of the best horror movies of all time, it is the best Exorcist movie of all time, exorcism movie of all time, whatever you want to call it. But above all else, in my opinion, The Exorcist is the GOAT. It's the greatest horror movie of all time, in my opinion. After 50 years, I can confidently say that. It's not my favorite, but I feel like it's the GOAT.
Yeah, and it's always interesting when people ask those type of questions too, because you can easily acknowledge as a film as being the greatest and still say, well, it's not my favorite. I have other personal favorites, but I consider that to be the GOAT of the genre. And being someone who just recently saw this, I absolutely understand again the hype surrounding this film and the prestige that it's built. As you mentioned, there are plenty of exorcism movies, possession movies, that we've seen that have tried to tackle it from a very serious approach. We've seen horror comedy. We've seen a bunch of different things within this genre, and haven't seen a lot of those films. And then watching this movie and going back to 1973, I can see how this spawned so many in the genre and why so many would try to capitalize on such a successful film, especially within the franchise, trying to making it an IP and a franchise in itself, and other films wanting to tackle possessions and whatnot in storytelling. But having watched it for the first time, I got to understand why people view it so highly in their rankings and when they talk about horror movies. And even before I had seen it, I said it's kind of hard to not have it be in the conversation. Now, obviously, I couldn't add to that conversation, but I said it's kind of hard to not have that movie in the conversation when you're talking about greatest of all time, because it's always mentioned. When I hear people talk about horror movies and they're great and some of the most iconic and legendary, The Exorcist was always in that conversation. So even from an outsider's perspective, I was like, oh, hey, I get, like, it's kind of hard to argue against that. I see nothing but praise and the way it's spoken about and whatnot. And now having seen it, I understand, like, I believe it, you know what I mean? And I can walk away from it saying, no, I can understand why it is the classic that it is. I mentioned to you off there, this is going to be added to my yearly rotation for the Halloween season, because it's one of those movies that I think I can appreciate each time I watch it. I look forward to the second time viewing to see if I notice anything I might have missed the first time and whatnot. But I'm thrilled that I got to watch a movie that came out many, many, many years ago, made a strong name for itself as one of the best, one of the greatest of all time, and be able to watch that and still be taken for a ride and be taken on this journey of of understanding and just thematically looking at this and appreciating it, not just as a great horror movie, but just as a great movie. Like, this is a great movie, as you mentioned, surpasses the genre of the horror community. And at this point, if there's anyone who hasn't seen it, I have now taken that responsibility of saying, hey, maybe you should watch it. Like, I pushed this off for a long time. You haven't seen it yet, maybe you should watch it and just give it an opportunity to give it a shot if you haven't. And I think that is a real testament to how strong the movie is as a whole. Again, phenomenal performances, great writing, tight script, great cinematography, great atmosphere. I love the progression of the story. I like our slow build. Less is more. We talk about this. Less is more. And nowadays, movies, it's not necessarily their fault. They feel like they have to do so much more and be so much bigger to get your attention. But sometimes we're reminded you can do something on a pretty small scale. Just make it strong, make it intimate, and make it so that we can feel it. And this is one of those movies. I felt everything about this movie, whether it was the relationship between a mother and a daughter, a priest losing his faith, trying to gain that back, a son and his mother, abandonment. Like, there was so much that I could take away from this movie that I could, you know, contribute to real life. And I think that's why this movie works so well. Is it even though we're talking about a movie with a possession, the exorcism, and we're seeing some practical effects that are amazing to look at, there's a lot of reality based throughout the movie that you can relate to. And I really enjoyed that about the movie. So as a first time watch and the first time viewer, I'm ecstatic that I walked away as happy as I did. And I can't wait for a second watch.
Now, Exorcist Believer is coming out, and this isn't the first time that they wanted to do like a sequel to the original. The Exorcist TV show, which got not one, but 2 seasons, came out in 2016 and 2017. So they tried to do that, and I never watched it. I haven't watched any of the sequels, to be honest
No, I
with you.
don't.
I think I saw Exorcist 2, maybe. I don't know.
Mhm.
But so they tried to do like a little bit of a sequel to the original. Obviously, it only went for 2 seasons. So we're trying again, but now this is a planned trilogy.
Mhm.
So David Gordon Green, he's already come off another trilogy. He just did the Halloween trilogy, which served
Yeah.
as direct sequels to the original, where it's another requel. They ignored the other sequels. So
Mhm.
maybe this could be the start of something. Maybe The Exorcist becomes um a name that is respected again. Because
Mhm.
unfortunately, the sequels were met with very mixed reviews
Yeah.
over the years,
Yeah.
negative reviews even, and
Mhm.
uh and such. But nonetheless, you know, this franchise spawns so many other things.
Yeah.
Without The Exorcist, we don't get The Conjuring. We
Yeah.
don't get the
A
Conjuring universe.
100%.
We don't get the exorcism of, and then insert the name of the person. You
Mhm.
know, so those are my final thoughts here. Just there's just too much respect as far
Yeah.
as this movie goes, not only to the horror community, but to the film community in general. Like, even if you don't like horror, if you like film, you could watch this
Yeah.
and still appreciate this and say, man, this is a great film. Like, and to me, I said this to you off the air. When I watch this again today, it's a masterpiece, in my opinion. It really is. That still holds up. Yes, 50 years later, yes, it still holds up.
And that's what's special about it, is that, again, I watched it for the first time in 2023, man. In 2023, a movie 50 years, 1973, and still able to walk away from that and go, that was like watching something made today. It just moved me that much. So you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yes. All righty, folks. That was the Panel Bros official breakdown for The Exorcist. If you could please give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube at the Panel Bros, we'd appreciate it. As always, those subscribes help expand our reach. And if you could also let us know how you felt about The Exorcist in the comments below, we'd appreciate that as well. And, you know, let's put it out there. Is The Exorcist the greatest horror movie of all time? Please let us know in the comments below. For Ricardo Segura, this is Anderson Marchak saying, thank you for coming to the panel.